Good morning. Hopefully people can hear me. Just gonna fiddle with the settings a little, that's better. Well, the weather's quite nice. It's not bad where I am. Hope we're all continuing to not go mad in the lockdown. What have we got today? I watched a really amazing concert on YouTube, which I would highly recommend. It was Japanese pianist, composer, Riichi Sakamoto did a concert from Tokyo, and it was beautiful. It was extremely moving. He was also a member of there we are, Yellow Magic Orchestra, one of my Japanese electropop band, one of my favourites, and it was absolutely beautiful. It's really great. Another little recommendation for you, which somebody may have posted on the Facebook group. Really great plugin, really great reverb plugin that came out last week for free from a company called Valhalla, who make quite a lot of plugins that cost money. They're not tremendously expensive. A lot of their stuff's about $50. It's very well regarded. But yeah, they brought out this plugin called Supermassive, which is it's a reverb. It's a sort of reverb / delay. It's really good for doing quite extreme things. I'm just going to paste the link into the chat there, just because it's free. It's free, and it's really good for doing some quite strange, ethereal, big reverb effects. Really nice. Had a bit of a play with it, and really recommend it, especially for that wonderful price of free. Yeah, it's wonderful. There really is a lot of obviously there's a lot of really great stuff that you can pay money for, but there's actually an impressive amount of stuff that you can get off the internet for free. Not the naughty kind of free. There's an awful lot of stuff that people make and give away for the completely legitimate kind of free that is really great. You don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money to get good results. Yeah, moving onwards. So I'm going to try today to sort of tackle the thorny subject of sort of mixing, and a bit of mixing and a bit of editing, and just how you kind of go about trying to massage your track into sounding a bit nicer, sounding a bit more quote unquote professional. And I knocked up a little tune yesterday. It's quite silly, but yeah, I just put something together as a way of working through some things in terms of mixing, and demonstrating some techniques. Definitely like to do some work on sort of how to use EQ and compression a little bit today. And yeah, it's a whole thing. It might be a little bit of a stream of consciousness today, but yeah, I think we'll we'll just see how it goes. So I've got a little track here. I'll just play about a couple of snippets just to. It's quite silly. It's got some very silly lyrics because I'm not really a lyricist, but So we've got some synth parts that I've recorded a couple of bits in. I've got some acoustic guitar here that I've recorded quite badly. Acoustic guitar is the only guitar I have here, so I've used some drums from Ableton, some synths and some vocals and some more synths. It all sounds like a bit of a guddle at the moment, so yeah, might just try and show you how I tend to go through trying to mix a track, and how you can use some of the tools in Ableton to make your stuff sound better. Normally I would mix on speakers, but I'm on headphones for this. I do have a pair of monitor speakers, although they're, in fact, one of them's been a little bit poorly for a while, and the other one is even more poorly today, so I'm not doing very well in the speaker department at the moment. So hey, that's fine. I'm going to use my headphones, that'll be fine. So, I mean, the first thing I would probably do, usually, it's a good thing when you're starting, just to make sure I'm quite untidy when I'm making music. I generally am quite untidy. I tend to work quite fast in Ableton, and I tend to just stuff things in and just whatever. Actually, this one I've started arranging in the way that I normally would, so it's all right. But I'll just I find it quite useful just to name the tracks what they are. So this one just had the name of the drum kit. I'm just going to call it drums. This one says synth bass. That's fine. This one is this analog synth. It's a sort of it's a sort of synth stab. I'm just going to call it synth stab. If I can type that correctly. This one I've already done it. This is a sort of more sort of pad sound from the excellent Tal Uno plugin, which is an emulation of the Roland Juno. I think it's an emulation of the Juno 106 or the 60 or the 6. I can't remember. They're all quite similar synths, but they're really nice 80s polyphonic analog synthesizers. What else have I got? I've got 3 tracks recorded from my Dreadbox Erebus, which is a little Greek synth module, little analog synth, which they're already named. I'm happy with that. I've got a little bit of acoustic guitar, which I've recorded quite badly, and it's a sort of part that would probably have benefited from being on an electric guitar, but I don't have one here, so hey. I've got some pretty silly lyrics. Am I ever going to mix? There we go. I'll try not to have to listen to them too much. I have, in fact, 6 tracks of backing vocals, 3 different parts, double tracked. And that's about it. I kind of just knocked this together last night so that we had something to work on. So how do you mix? It's in some ways a bit of a dark art, but I think we can work through it. Obviously, the most basic thing of mixing is just that you have volume faders, and you can just change the volume of different parts to blend them together in the way that you want, and that's the really basic side of mixing, just changing the volume. You also have what I've managed to make my don't know what I've done. Oh, no, I'm just being stupid today. Also panning. Panning or panorama is another very useful tool for placing things in the stereo field, and we'll definitely be looking at that. But I mean, if we're going to make a meal, you want to prepare your ingredients first. You've got to chop those carrots. You've got to mix things together. You've got to make sure your ingredients are in the right state. So I think everything goes up to about, I think I've got a bunch of tracks at the end here that are either nothing or just little things that were useful while I was creating the track, and I'm just going to mute them all. And in fact, I'm just going to for now, I'm just going to mute everything except the drum track, so we can have a little look at the drum part and about some of the things that you can do within the drum racks for mixing. So I'm just going to find a section where the beat's kind of playing most of it. You know, it's kind of playing most of its parts. I'm just going to select this section of the song, and I'm going to go Command L, which just puts the loop brace around it and loops it. I tend to loop sections of the songs quite a lot when I'm mixing, and I haven't muted the bass. There we are. Okay. So this is a kind of real drum kit-ish kind of thing. And so first things first, if you've got the session view up here, which does allow you to kind of view the whole mixer a little bit better, which is useful when you're mixing. You can, if you click this chevron, this little thing here, it actually opens up all the individual parts of the. There's a lot of snare tracks there. Oh yeah, there are. This drum kit has an awful lot of variations of snares and things in it, but I'm not using very many of them. So now we can see that I've got, my kick there, and my snare. I've got some hi-hats. I'm mainly just using the open and closed. There are quite a few variations of different hi-hat techniques in this. I think I'm using the toms a little bit, which are somewhere over here, and there might be some ride and crash and stuff. But I'm going to just start with the kick drum. So I'm just going to solo this kick drum, and if you double click on this now, instead of showing me everything inside the drum rack, it's only showing me the kick drum. So that's the whole drum rack, and if I click on here, that's just the kick drum. So I can drop effects on here. There's a few things you could do. If this was like a real drum kit, sometimes with kick and snare and toms, you might use what's called a gate, a noise gate. They call it a gate because it's it opens and closes. It's a way of stopping the sound from getting through based on the volume. So if I stick this gate in here, is that in the right place? I'm second guessing myself today. No, that's fine. That's still inside. Okay, so immediately we've made the kick drum sound absolutely rubbish. But a gate's just a device that can basically, it says you set a threshold, a volume threshold, and it says everything above the volume gets to come through for a little while, and then when it goes below the volume, it's gonna shut it off again. And I'm not sure if I actually need a gate on this because it's quite a tight sample, but you can see as I bring the threshold down to kind of find the level that might tighten it up a little bit. I mean, you also have hold and release, so that's basically once it's opened up, how long is it gonna stay open? How long is that gate gonna stay open for? And you can obviously bring these right down, and I'm getting some strange phasing with this drum kit, and I'm not quite sure why it is, but we're gonna ignore it for now. So yeah, you could use that if you really want to tighten it up, and you can hear it just kind of takes away some of the part of it. This is something I'm probably going to say a lot during this. It's always a good thing when you're using processing tools like this to do what's called A/B-ing. Click it on and off. This button at the top left, if I've never said this yet in any of these things, that's the on-off button for every device. So it's good just to kind of try things on and off and go, am I making it better? I'm just going to leave that off because this is actually quite a well very well sampled drum kit. If it was, if this was a recording of a live drum kit, you might be using a gate because, every microphone is going to pick up bleed, what we call bleed. It's not just going to pick up the kick drum, it's going to pick up little bits of other stuff as well. And you might, especially if you're going to use processing after it, you might want to try and isolate just the kick drum so that you can do stuff. But this is a pretty solid sounding kick already, so I'm going to ignore the gate, but I thought I would just demonstrate it. Next thing I might do is use a little bit of EQ. So EQ8, EQ is an equalizer, which is essentially a special type of filter like we were using on the synthesizers. EQ8 is a really, really, really solid equalizer, so this allows you to shape the tonal qualities of something, obviously turning up the bass or down the bass, or turning up the treble or down the treble, and yeah, you can group audio tracks a bit like that drum rack. Yeah, absolutely. I think when I get to the sort of grouped vocals later on, I'll demonstrate that. Just noticed that question popping up. Okay, so once again, this is quite a good sounding kick drum, but I might just give it a little. For me, and a lot of this is just using your ears. The two things that you're looking for with EQ is, for me, you're looking for how does the thing sound just in general. Do you want to change anything about how it sounds? And then as you go forward with the mix, you're also looking at not only how does it sound, but how does it sound with in context with the other things. And can you use the EQ to, make it pop through more, or to kind of pull aspects of the sound of it out of the way in order to let other elements of your mix through? But we're just on the kick drum right now, so I'm just gonna, for me, I feel like there's a little bit of something in the mid-range that I don't like. Just to go through what you have on the default setting of this EQ. You'll see here you've got a 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's your 4 bands of EQ, and you can just grab them here and do stuff with them. Whee! And yeah, you can, and you can also grab them, and you actually have the 3 controls over here. The basic setup it has is that the bottom one is what's called a low shelf, and you can see that when I move it up, it's basically just it's like a shelf. It's like the shape of a shelf. It's just going to push up all the frequencies below below this frequency here. It's gonna kind of slope up, and then everything below it gets pushed up. So the low end would really, and you can really go for it. And whoa, you go, oh, that sounds great. I definitely would always say just be careful with EQ and compression. I think it's very easy to get quite extreme with it, and you can kind of make your mix quite muddy if you go too far with it. So firstly, I feel like there's something in the mid range that I don't like. So that's the low shelf. I've just left that alone for now, and you can click that to put the gain to 0, so it's doing nothing. The top, just to finish what I was saying, the top one is a high shelf, so same idea, but it's just, everything above its frequency is going to get pushed up. I'm just going to leave that alone just now as well. And the middle two are what are called bell curves, which are just going to put a little peak, put a little curved EQ. Now these bell curves, obviously you have the frequency, which moves up and down where the peak is happening. You have a gain, which is how much it's either boosting around that frequency or cutting out. And we have also what's called a Q control, which is essentially the width of the curve. So as you turn it up, it gets thinner, so you can do what we call very surgical EQ, which is I find can be quite useful when you're dealing sometimes with acoustic instruments and things. The thinner you put the sort of slimmer you put the bandwidth, the less natural your EQ might sound. Somewhere in the middle can be quite good for starters, or it really depends what you're trying to achieve. What I really want to do is have a not a crazy one. I just want to find there's a bit of a frequency in the mid-range that I don't like. So quite a good technique for me is just to put the gain up on it, put it up so it's doing something, and just use your ears and just sweep the frequencies around until you find something that you either like or don't like. I think it sounds a bit nosy there. I'm going to just try pulling that out. Let's just... Yeah, it's quite subtle, but that's alright. I might give it a little boost at the bottom, and I'm going to see what... Maybe just a little bit at the top, just to emphasise that the sort of the beater sound. Just give it a little bit of click, let it come through. If you're really needing to do a lot of EQ on something, there are actually 8 bands of EQ, so you can just switch in another one, and you can actually change what kind it is. This one in the middle, that's your bell curve, which is what the default. This one here is the low shelf. This one is the high shelf. You'll see it kind of goes from low things to high things. There are also that's a high pass filter. High pass filters are very useful. We're going to be doing quite a lot of that. That's going to basically cut everything from a certain frequency down. I might just put that in so that it comes in at about 30 hertz, because stuff below about 30 hertz is kind of rumble a lot of the time. Okay, I've done some quite subtle stuff to this kick drum because it actually sounds quite good already. Not entirely sure if I like what I've done to it, but that's fine. That's great. That'll do for now. Now, I might use a bit of compression as well, so I'm just going to drag in a compressor after the EQ. Now, compression is like a whole thing, but we talked a little bit about compression a wee while ago, so I'll just go over it again. What a compressor does. What a compressor does is it has some sort of detector that will detect the level of the audio that's coming in, and it has a threshold setting, and the threshold is basically after when the signal coming in reaches the threshold level, a certain volume level, it's going to start pushing it down. And this can be quite good either for just kind of leveling out a signal, but it's also quite good for shaping sounds, shaping their response over time. And for drums, that can be quite a good way of sometimes making them punchier, bringing out the snap or bringing out the decay, depending on what sort of thing you're after. So I'm just going to have a listen to this kick. So as I start bringing the threshold down, you'll see this meter here, this is the gain reduction meter, and that is, you can see that's it pushing down the kick drum level. So it's reaching the threshold level and it's pushing it down. And hopefully you can hear that that's the way it's set at the moment. That's actually sort of bringing up the later parts of the sound, and I'm not sure if I want that. So we have this, we have ratio, we have attack and release. Ratio is essentially how much it's going to push it down by. The further you turn the ratio up, ratios are, it's defined in terms of a ratio. So it's the default setting is 2:1. What that means is that for every 2 decibels yeah, if the signal is 2 decibels over the threshold, it will push it back to being 1 decibel over the threshold. As you turn it up, if it's, you can get it up to, say 9 decibel, that 9 to 1, that means if it's 9 decibels over the threshold, it'll pull it back to just being 1 over. It's essentially the further you turn the ratio up, the harder it's going to work. And if you turn it up sort of pretty high, that's into what we call limiting. A limiter is basically a compressor, but with a high ratio. So limiters are, they call them limiters because it's the idea is that you're just setting a limit and going, none shall pass. It will not get louder than this. I'm not going to turn it all the way up. I'm just going to leave it at maybe, let's call it maybe 3 to 1. And have a little play with this attack control. So the attack is basically, once it's reached the threshold, how quickly are we going to start stomping on it? And at the moment it's set to 2 milliseconds, which is which is very fast. For drums, it's quite often quite nice to just push the attack up. And what that does is it lets the initial snap of the sound through before it starts squashing it. And that can be really useful to bring out the snap or the attack of a kick drum or a snare drum or a tom if you feel it needs that little bit more. And the release control is basically once it drops back below the threshold, how fast is it going to stop? How fast is it going to stop squashing it? And let's just A/B that a little bit. I might try that with the gate on again. Nah, nasty. Okay. Okay, it might be a bit rumbly, but we've done a bit of EQ and compression there, so I would probably just move through. And cause the other thing to say about compressors is that compressors actually make things quieter because you're essentially pushing it down. And then normally what you would have with a compressor is obviously you have your threshold, you have all these controls which set how it's squashing it, and then you would have what we call a makeup gain at the end. So you're kind of squashing it all down, and then you would have a control at the end to basically push the whole thing up again. It's evening it out, squashing it a bit, then bringing the whole level back up. By default, the compressor in Ableton has this button in, which is the makeup gain, which will actually just automatically match the level. It generally makes it actually a bit louder. You can, if you want, switch this off and just use the output gain to do it manually. To be honest, life's too short. There are a whole lot of other things about that. There are actually a ton of other settings in this. Actually, there are these buttons, these little 3 buttons at the bottom, give you some different views. I'm going to leave knee controls alone at the moment. The third little one actually gives you a view over time, and this line at the top is what it's actually doing. So is how much it's reducing the gain, and you can actually start to see visually what it's doing to the sound, which is quite useful. Okay, right, I'm going to stop listening to this kick drum over and over again because it's starting to get to me. I'm just going to turn it down a little because the compression's brought up the level. Okay, I'm just going to have a little... Now, what I'm doing here is not necessarily always best practice. It's good to solo things and listen to them, but then it's also good to return to the kind of context. So, okay, I'm going to have a listen to the snare. I'd already put a gate in here, that's horrible. See, I might just... I don't know whether the YouTube compression will be letting it through, but there is just a little bit of ring on that snare that I might want to tighten up with a gate. We'll see, this might be ruining it. And just same again, I'm just going to go through, I might put a little bit of EQ, find stuff that I like or don't like. You can, and you have a nice view of the, you know, what's happening frequency wise. Sometimes I like to just put a little mid out, give it a little of that. I'm terrible for always just being a bit smiley facey, but you know, that's all right. Just a bit subtle. I might put a bit of compression on it. Once again, just pull the threshold down until it starts to reduce the gain. And you can see that really is bringing it, you know, making that snare kind of punch. And if I push the attack up a little, that's all right. Might be a bit much, but okay, kick and snare sounding all right. There's a whole bunch of different hi-hat samples in this kit. So in order to make my life easy, you can actually group things inside the racks, because I don't want to have to go and put effects on every single one of these hi-hats individually, because life's too short. Why bother? So actually, I'm going to click on the first one. I'm actually only using 2 or 3 of them, but I'm just going to group them all together. So if I click on the first one, hold Shift, click on the last one. I can right click and I can group them. And give it a little minute, and it actually makes a drum rack within a drum rack. These things can nest all the way down like Russian dolls. It's crazy. But now I'm just going to call that hi-hats. Just so now all my hi-hat chains are all together. And same again. I'm just going to put a bit of EQ in there. Now on the hi-hats, I'm actually going to put in a high pass filter and just take out everything below. You see, if I pull that all the way up, it's just going to turn into a little tiny thing. But I'm just going to take out everything that's not necessary for a hi-hat sound. Always clean things up a bit. I'm probably just going to take out quite a broad sweep of this kind of mid-range, because I just want them to stay nice and top-endy. And they're a bit quiet compared to the other stuff, so I'm actually just going to drag in a compressor. I'm not sure if I even want it to do much. I'm just dragging down the threshold so that the automatic makeup gain is going to kind of turn them back up. And let's see. Now, I'm going to go back to, I'm actually, I could keep going with the other stuff, with the toms and the other things, but actually I think they're sounding okay. So there's a couple of other things to talk about that we never really covered. So I'm just going back to, I've just selected the whole drum rack again. This is quite a big one. It's got lots of bits in it. It is possible. The drum rack itself, you know, as you can see, the way we've kind of, you know, we've opened this out, and it's actually got a little mixer of its own. It's almost like a mixer, you know, a mixer before it gets to Live's mixer. And yeah, that's really useful. And you can actually also have send and return effects inside the drum rack. So say I wanted, you know, quite often I will have a reverb for the drums, and you can actually just have that inside the drum rack. What you need to do, you need to show hide chain list, which is the second one of these little buttons down here, and that shows you all the chains. There's quite a lot of them, you know, our kick, and you know, if you go through them this way, that's our kick, and if I select it over here, I get the stuff, and you can see the effects that we put on it earlier on. More show hide things. This is send and return, so I have to click on returns. Sends is currently grayed out because there are no return tracks. But if I want to drag in, I'm just going to drag where it says drop audio effects here. I'm going to drag in a reverb. So now we have a reverb inside our drum rack that we can send an amount of each individual drum to if we want to. I'm just going to find a preset reverb for now. Maybe just a. Let's see what big room is like. And now that there's actually a return track, this send thing is no longer grayed out. And you'll see here, this is how much of each cell inside the drum rack is getting sent to the reverb that is also inside the drum rack. So you'll see that's quite a lot of reverb on that snare. Not sure if I like that reverb. I'm just going to try a different one. That's all right. I might send a little bit of hi-hats to it, and can't remember which one of these toms I'm using. By the way, these send controls are all also up here. So I could do it from up here, find my toms. I'm just going to send all the toms a little bit into this reverb, just to give the drums a bit of ambience. You see, it's just giving it a little bit of life. Cool. I realise time is going moving ever onwards. So okay, I'm roughly happy with that. I might actually just turn the kick, snare and hats down a little bit because I haven't processed the other parts. I think that'll even it all out a bit better. I'm not quite sure why that cymbal is sounding phasey like that. I was trying to work it out yesterday, and honestly I ran into a brick wall and then I got sleepy. Yeah, in terms of putting high pass on the snare, yeah, quite often I will high pass a snare drum. I actually didn't this time because I was feeling lazy. But yeah, it can be a good idea. You know, I could just, this low band's not doing anything. I could just change it into a high pass filter, and because you can see there is a bit of stuff happening down here. So if I just be careful not to kind of kill the feeling of it. Now I might also just do some processing on the whole drum kit. You know, so if you drag things just onto the main track, that'll be something that's going to process the whole thing. It's a really nice effect from Ableton 9 onwards called Glue Compressor, which is an emulation of a sort of classic console, what they call a bus compressor, which is something that's designed more for compressing a whole group of things. And this is one of these ones where it's got quite simple controls, and it kind of just makes things sound good. And they call it glue because that when you're compressing a bunch of elements, it kind of sonically kind of glues them together. It just kind of pushes things together. So if I just play the whole kit, at the moment it's not doing anything. This has they've made it the meter. This is the gain reduction meter here, and there's a I'm just going to bring it down so it's just doing a little bit of work. And then this one actually doesn't do automatic makeup gain. But you can see it kind of brings up more of the sort of room sound a little bit, just makes everything smash a bit more. I'm not going to do too much with this, but there is, if I switch that off, there is also one of the new effects in Ableton 10, is this one called Drum Bus, which does all sorts of magic. I haven't actually played with it that much. It has, you know, controls like crunch, and there's another one that can actually, it has this boom control, which I think is actually some sort of tuned resonance. I'm not going to go too crazy with this. It is definitely one of these plugins I haven't played with enormously or worked out entirely what it's doing, but it does seem to be one of these things that just kind of makes things nice. Right, I'm happy with those drums. I think they sound decent. I have essentially just used the Make Things Nice plugin there, which I've not properly done my research into what Drum Bus is actually doing under the hood. But there we go. Drums sound quite decent. I'm just going to take these. I think when you're mixing generally, it's quite tempting just to kind of turn everything up loud, but in the end, you kind of are looking for a master level that's not peaking. So I'm just going to pull these down to maybe minus 6, minus 10, something like that. So that I've got room for the rest of my elements of the mix. So I'm just gonna pull in the bass. Now this is a synth bass, and actually I think it sounds alright. I'm going to bung an EQ in, maybe sweep around a bit. Now, this is where we start getting into just thinking about the relationships between different things. And it's sometimes a good idea to just think about what, quite often your bass instrument, whatever it is, whether it's a bass guitar, synth bass, whatever, and your kick drum, and sometimes to an extent maybe floor toms or other kind of low drums, are going to be occupying similar frequency ranges, and sometimes it can be good to bring a little out of one or the other. Actually, I might give this a little bit of a boost just to bring up some of the and you can the nice thing with the displays in live is if I go back and just click on my kick drum, you can you can look at the EQ, and I can see this is quite a low kick drum, but you can kind of see the frequency range that it's working in. By the way, you do have a little chevron where you can actually make the whole EQ display bigger, and you can actually make it even bigger there if you really want to zero in on things, and that actually gives you a display down here of where your mouse is, what frequency your mouse is sitting at. Which can be quite good sometimes just to sometimes work out the relationships between different elements. But actually, Actually, I think these are sitting okay together. I might bring this high shelf down a little bit. Just gonna bring a little high end off the bass, because once I start bringing other elements, yeah, it might be nice just to leave a little space. Are glue and drum bus doing what they call parallel compression? I think the drum bus almost certainly is doing parallel compression. I was probably going to leave the idea of parallel compression a little bit alone today, but yes, it is actually possible. Parallel compression is a trick that people use with drums quite a lot that can actually be really good, where you can basically, usually, but in the old school way, they would send the whole drum kit to two different buses, two different kind of groups. One of them will be left without any compression on it. The other one will be compressed, quite often quite hard, you know, really making the compressor work, and then quite often just bringing in a little bit of the heavily compressed one can give it a real kind of smash sound. You know, really, because it really brings up the release and the room sound and things, which can give quite a heavy sound. The Prodigy kind of drums had an awful lot of that stuff, especially in the kind of middle part of their career. Okay, so I've taken a bit of high end off the bass. I'm fine with that bass. That's all good. I think I'll look at the synth pad sound next, because the synth pad's lovely, but it's almost too thick. I think in terms of the mix, this pad is probably going to have to get tamed a little bit. So actually, I am just gonna, and this, for most of the elements from here on in, I'm probably going to use the bottom band of the compressor and high pass filter them, because if it's not a kick drum or a bass line, anything below 80 to 100 hertz in terms of frequency, it's not going to be doing anything. And especially if it's something you've recorded in the house, anything that is in that signal below that is probably rumble or the sound of buses going past your flat, or things like that. And you know, just doing that to everything that's not a bass instrument, I think is a good habit to get into, because it can really clean things up in the low end. You know, it's all these little bits of just noise and rumble can really add up just to kind of make things a bit muddy down there. So yeah, first thing. Now, because I know I've got other kind of high frequency elements that are going to be doing other stuff, I'm probably just going to shelf off a little bit of the high. This pad sound is very kind of warm. It's got a very nice mid-range, and I don't want to kill that too much, because I think that's where it does its best work. I might take out a bit more around there. That's quite subtle, but now at this point, I will pause to say another thing that I quite like to do. Another thing I would do somewhere along the way of kind of setting up a mix is just to have some options in terms of return tracks with some reverbs on them. So I'm actually gonna I'm just going to create another return track. So there's already one. The default live set will have a reverb and a delay. So actually there's a sort of 2.5, let's call it a 2-second reverb. Put a bit more high end in. And maybe I'm going to send this. To be honest, it's quite a whooshy sound already. Send that to a little bit of reverb. That's quite subtle, to be honest, but I'm going to pull that back a little bit. I don't see a huge problem with that. That's working okay for me. Let's see what's next. Little synth stab sound. I think given that I have this synth pad here that's doing quite a lot of the kind of warm, kind of more middle range, I'm gonna make this this synth stab sound. I'm definitely gonna high pass it. I'm maybe gonna even take out a little bit there, and I'm gonna boost the top a little bit, which is going to make it sound a little thin, but I think in the mix, I think it's just going to get it a little bit out of the way of that other one, and also let its kind of nice stabby nature poke through. And I'll think about panning in a little bit. I think the next thing that I will look at, because it's definitely something that's gonna need a little bit of work to kind of fit in with these really solid, like, electronic elements, is this acoustic guitar, which I've recorded quite badly and I've played quite badly. So, you know, let's see what we can do about that. So let's have a listen to it on its own. So currently there's no effects on this. It's not great. And quite often what I would, before you start playing with anything like EQ, compression, flanger, delay, whatever, you know, it's taken me such a long time to really take this to heart. If it's badly played, don't edit it, play it again. If you've got the opportunity to, just go and practice the part and play it again. You know, if it sounds a bit bad, work out why. You know, change your mic positioning, change your mic. These things are important, but I'm going to assume that, you know, there's no way I could possibly re-record this, you know, that was a golden performance, and I'll never do it like that again. So I'm going to high pass it, and actually there's a bit of a sort of weird rumble at about 100 hertz. It's a bit weird mid-range, and actually I'm probably going to want this to kind of poke through a bit. I'm just going to knock in another EQ band. I'll just try and give it a little bit of sparkle. I might even use this top one as a low pass filter and just cut off the top more, just because I can kind of hear the room that I've recorded in a little bit coming through, and I'm about to add a compressor which is only going to bring that up, so I'll see if that does anything. So I'll bring in a compressor now. Now I'd quite like this to, I might treat this a little bit, well, I'm going to try treating it a little bit like a snare drum. Pushing the attack up a bit, just to try and emphasise the transients. It's a nylon string acoustic played with my fingers because I didn't even have a plectrum, so it's not going to have the most attack anyway, but I'm going to do what I can. There is a little bit more thin sounding with this EQ setting, but I'm going to have a listen to it in the mix. okay. It's not terrible. And I might try sending a bit of it to that reverb to make it a bit less dry. Now, the other thing is about it is it's been quite badly played. So once again, I'm going to say, I'm really going to say, if you can avoid fixing things in the mix or with editing, do. Good question. I'll deal with that in a minute. Yeah, if you can avoid fixing things in the mix, do. It's honestly, it's taken me forever to really take these things to heart. That if somebody's round recording vocals or whatever, sometimes you're like, I think we've got enough. I think we've recorded enough, and then you end up sitting for hours editing together little bits of different takes to try and get a decent vocal performance, when really what you should have done is gone, let's take a break for 10 minutes and then do another couple of takes and really nail it. Record the thing correctly first, and honestly, your life is so much easier. Oh my word! But yeah, once again, let's assume that I've broken my hand. Can't possibly play this again. You can use warping to kind of fix the timing on stuff. For instance, in this, I kind of seem to mess up that last jigget at the end of the bar just about every time. So if I kind of double click on the ones that I want to kind of anchor and leave in place, then I can just double click on these transients and just move them into time, move them on to, I don't know if I've done that. No, I think I've done that badly. Let's try that. I'll put the click track on. That doesn't sound great, but yeah, it's also because that's sometimes where it detects the transients is not the right place. It's always good when you're moving these around to just find another one after it to kind of click down so that it anchors it. Otherwise you start moving the whole thing around, and that can be bad. Woo, just like that. I've messed it all up. No, I'm going to undo. I've done something funky here. Oh, I see what I've done. Yeah. So yeah, you can just go in and make warp markers, sort of. In the appropriate places. And just start to correct your terrible playing. And sometimes this is a terrible idea, but and you can get too into it and really try and fix absolutely everything. And sometimes it's better just to find the worst offenders and fix them. Change the warp mode so it sounds a bit more natural. Don't like that one. I'm just sort of putting in enough markers that when I move one, it doesn't mess everything else up. And that's, I've kind of messed up that last bar a little bit. Let's just hit that there. That might be alright. Just going to copy the fixed one. It's not perfect, but okay. Joe was asking what order I would use EQ, compression, and reverb. Usually, I would put EQ before compression. Sometimes you can actually do both. Some people would compression, although it affects volume, can have an effect on the frequency ranges as well. So sometimes people put EQ after compression in order to sort of even out things that's done. But generally, I would EQ and then compress, particularly because the compressor is gonna act based on volume, and say there's a lot of low frequency information happening that might trigger the compressor, but that you don't necessarily want to. It's better to filter that out before it gets to the compressor, so that you're actually sort of compressing the actual signal that people are going to hear. It's not a hard and fast rule, but that's generally I would go EQ then compression, and then reverb I'm usually using as a send effect. Sometimes you might want to, for instance, put a reverb plugin onto a track and then compress it, which might kind of bring up the reverb sound, and that might be an effect that you want. But yeah, generally I would EQ then compress. Feel free to which ones are the muddy frequencies in the master EQ? Well, this is kind of all depends how the mix comes together in a way. I mean, the low end stuff can be a good place, and that's, as I was saying earlier on, I really think high passing just about everything. High pass filters everywhere are a good thing. There's this acoustic guitar is not gonna have much going on below kind of 100 hertz. It might have a little, and if it was a track that was just a sort of solo acoustic guitar, I would probably not be doing EQ quite this extreme. But I definitely find that the more elements there are in a mix, basically the more stuff that's in a mix, quite often the more processing, the more EQing, and the more trickery you might have to use in order to try and get everything to have its own little place. Not sure if that low pass filter was a good idea. Now I haven't panned anything yet, and this might be a point where quite often what I like to do in terms of panning, before I get to the next thing, God, mixing's hard. I feel like I do ramble a bit with mixing because it's just something that takes practice. But panning and the stereo field, generally, creating the stereo image of your track and where things go. A good rule of thumb is certainly the way that I tend to work it. Lower frequencies are less directional. Lower frequencies, the way that we hear, we don't hear we don't hear the direction of low frequencies as well. So my general rule of thumb is almost that, like, the higher in frequency the elements are in the mix, the more I would be happy to pan them. Kick drums and bass instruments tend to be dead center. These are kind of rules of mixing that feel free to break them. They're I'm sort of teaching you how to kind of make things in a certain way, and rules are made to be broken, and you can do cool stuff with panning bass around, but in a sort of little silly tune like this, that's quite a generic style. I'm going to leave my kick and my bass line right down the middle. And yeah, in terms of panning, I'm just going to move this acoustic guitar over here beside this synth stab. These two elements are kind of doing something similar and occupying vaguely similar territory in terms of frequencies. I mean, this one's a bit higher up. That would be somewhere where I quite often I would go, okay, if I leave them both down the middle, they're kind of sitting on top of each other. But if I pan one out a bit and the other one out a bit, then suddenly, you know, they start to complement each other a bit better, and they start to have a little bit of a... they start to have a bit more space to move. And I'm going to put a bit of reverb on that synth stat. I don't like that reverb very much. It's a bit weird. I'm just going to find a different reverb setting because it's upsetting me. Okay, these are all sitting together okay, and it's after midday, so I'd better keep trying to move through. I've got these three synths, these three Erebus synths. Where do they come in? They're in over here. I'm just going to move to a different part of the song where these are all in together. Now these are all from the same synth. I'm probably just going to select them all, right click, and group them together because they're not going to be hugely different tonally. And they're all muted, so I'm not hearing them. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I quite like these, to be honest. I might just put a bit of EQ over the whole group. High pass. Maybe take a tiny bit out there, put in a little bit of top end. I might put a bit of delay on these, I'm not quite sure. And because there are kind of three elements together, what I might do is just pan them all a little bit. So I've got a... Okay, so it's a sort of low one, a middle one, and a high one. I think I'll maybe leave the low one in the middle, put one... Well, let's try it quite far out, see what it does. I often find myself just making, you know, as I'm bringing things, just making little... Making little tweaks, and once you start to bring in something else, being like, okay, is something... Is something obscuring? Maybe I'll try... Yeah, maybe I'll put the highest of those synths on the same side as the acoustic, because it keeps it out of the way a little bit. I feel like I'm losing that acoustic now a little bit. Maybe I just want to just bring up a little string sound on that. That's not too bad. I mean, these synths, this little Greek synth really does. It cuts through a mix quite nicely. Let's see. Okay, we've got a rough balance. So now I wrote some absolutely dreadful lyrics for this. They're quite meta, and I didn't sing them very well. So this is going to be my favourite bit of this. Okay, I've got two kind of main vocal parts that they're just the same thing, but one of them's them's up the octave. They're probably not very well sung. I might find a nice reverb. I'm just going to be naughty and use one that's not from Ableton. What am I after? This is Soft Tube SAR reverb. I'm going to put that on my B return there and use that generally as my sort of vocal reverb. In terms of reverb in general, I think usually in a mix, you know, I might have 2 or 3 different reverbs at the most. I think, you know, maybe sometimes something shorter for things like drums, which I've already, in this case, I've actually put that inside the drum rack. Sometimes a sort of middle, you know, maybe a sort of 1.5 second, 1.5 odd second. Sometimes for things like acoustic guitars where you just want to give them a bit of ambience, I've actually just sent that acoustic guitar into that dark hall, which might not have been the right thing. And then usually I'll have something for vocals, which I quite like a reverby vocal, especially if we're about to be listening to my voice. But anyway, this is quite a nice reverb plugin. What I like about it is that it doesn't have very many controls and it sounds good. And I'm just going to find, let's find a vintage plate. But yeah, enough of that. Now we get to listen to my terrible voice. Where I'm just going to find part of the song where that's. Am I ever going to mix this? It's pretty cheesy, but let's turn it down a little bit. I'm going to high pass this. Am I ever going to mix this? I find that the mic that I used has quite a. What is the device that makes it sound so nice? I've written some sort of meta lyrics there because I'm not really a lyricist. They're just about us mixing this song. Do mixing as a record? I do a little bit of it, especially quite often with things I'm actually recording. I sort of get annoyed at them if they sound bad, so I will quite often just do a little bit of EQ and a little bit of compression as I go. But I feel like it's especially at the point of mixing. It's always good to kind of check your work. You know, if you have been doing EQ and compression as you go along, it's good when you're coming to kind of doing the final mix. Try switching it all off. Try switching it all off to see whether what you did was actually any good. A/Bing stuff, you know, trying stuff switched on and off is very useful. It's also really worth noting, especially when you're using stuff like compression, that the way that, especially with the way that the Ableton compressor works, where it kind of automatically makes up the gain at the end, so that, you know, as you drag the threshold down, it always gets louder. Louder always sounds better. It always does to your ears. Thank you. You know, your ears always, you know, just the way that our hearing works, it's always goes louder is more exciting. But it's not always, you know, compressing stuff's hard. It's not always the right choice. So it's, you know, it's always good to look over your stuff. But yeah, basically in answer to that question, yeah, I kind of half mix as I'm going quite often. Because, you know, it's also kind of a question of whether it's part of you know, EQing and stuff could be part of a sort of sound design process, which I would see as being, you know, part of the creative process, and mixing, I guess, is a technical and a creative process. But yeah, I do a bit of both. So. That's not terrible. I'm definitely going to compress this vocal. So, gonna maybe just go to maybe a 3:1 ratio, nothing too crazy. Drag it down and see what happens. In terms of attack and release settings for vocals, if you leave the attack pretty fast, you know, a couple of milliseconds or somewhere around there, it'll smooth it out. And it's quite nice. If you're mixing something like hip hop, you know, any sort of rappers or anything like that, where you want more aggressive vocal, you might treat it a bit more like I was treating the snare drum earlier on, where you can put the attack up further and it'll emphasize the kind of consonants and the stuff that, you know, the beginnings of words and things, which, you know, hip hop stuff, I get, you're really about getting the diction and getting every word out. But this is quite a smooth vocal. Am I ever going to mix this thing, this thing? If we go on to the other view, we can see. What is the device that makes it sound so nice? I'm gonna let this work quite hard. So many options, which one is for me? Make good choices right first time. I'm gonna go fairly reverby on it. It's a pretty silly vocal. Oh, what a great point you've just made, which I had completely forgotten about. Yes, that is an excellent point that really should have been brought in earlier. Context is everything, and it is actually a good idea when you're mixing. Sometimes just to have another track sitting there, a song by somebody else completely, something that you like, something that you think is mixed well. To use as a reference, so that as you're going through doing your thing, you can check that reference track and go, okay, how does the overall frequency range work in that? Because it's very easy when you're mixing to be kind of have tunnel vision, and you can it is insanely common for you to spend hours one night mixing a track and you listen to it the next day and you're like, what did I do? What was I up to? Because you might have spent forever trying to make the kick drum sound perfect, and actually you've just turned it into a huge, overly bassy pile of nonsense. So yes, it is. It's not something I've done here. I really should have picked out a reference track before we started. So, but it is good. It's also good to take breaks. Get away from the computer, reset your ears. Another thing to do, and maybe once I've got a bit further along with this, is something I find extremely useful when you're mixing. I cannot recommend this enough. When you're listening to it, when you're kind of, especially if you're, once you've kind of started putting your elements together and you just are starting to listen to the whole song, if you have a way of switching off your screen, whether it's, if you're on a Mac, you can just use the, brightness to put the screen all the way off, or if you're using an external monitor, switch it off. Switch it off because you'll stop staring at the screen and you'll start listening. Listening is important. Or another great tip. This was actually a tip from a mastering engineer about he was talking about mastering, but I think it applies equally well to mixing. He said he was saying, when you're at a certain point in the process, just go and get somebody else. Go and get somebody in from the street. Get your friend. Get whoever. Buy them a coffee. Get them in. Sit them down and listen to it with them. It's not about getting, because what he was saying is it's not about getting their opinion. I mean, other people's opinions are good. It's always nice to listen to other people's opinions. But he's like, as soon as somebody else is in the room with you, you start hearing it differently as well. And sometimes it'll just make you hear things that you haven't heard before. Carrying on, I'm going to try and make myself less sad about this vocal. Am I ever going to mix this thing, this thing? What is the device that so I think it sounds so nice. It's not a great vocal, but we'll see. And actually, so the next one's a kind of high version. I'm actually just going to hold down the Alt key. And, I've already done stuff to this. Well, that's very naughty of me. Yeah, to go back to Joe's question about whether I mix stuff as I go, I absolutely do, because when I was making this, kind of knocking together this silly little track yesterday, for the purposes of using as a demonstration, it was all I could do to stop myself from doing it, and I kept, just banging a reverb, banging an EQ on, banging a compressor on, and then going, oh no, Gav, this is the bit you're supposed to be doing tomorrow. So yeah, I clearly do. So yeah. now that I've got rid of all that stuff, I'm just going to copy these over because I reckon I would be doing something similar. I'll copy them and then tweak them a little bit. Am I ever going to mix this thing? I'm definitely going to need some compression on this. I'm sort of switching between full voice and... What is the device that makes it sound so nice? It's not great. Maybe give it a little bit of sparkle at the top. There's so many options, which one is for me? We're going to give the high vocal a bit more. The choice is right first time and it's easy. Some things that can be quite nice on vocals, which I could do as a send effect or not. I'm just going to put in another return track, although it's something you could do as a... I'll just put it on the track for now. Am I ever going? I'm not hating this now. I'm going to put a delay. Okay, that's definitely not what I'm trying to do with this delay. I'm just going to switch off the sync. A little what they call a slapback echo. It's the kind of Elvis voice effect. Can sometimes be quite a nice thing, just to kind of thicken it up. Sometimes even if I put these two at slightly different times. I'm just going to put this to somewhere in the 100 millisecond range, and maybe this one somewhere a little bit higher. Am I ever going to mix this thing, It does make it a little phasey. What is the device that makes it sound so nice? And that, because I've got slightly different delay times on the left and the right, it gives it a little bit more stereo width, and that can be quite good. Even just if I mix in a little bit of that on my vocal, it can just give it a bit more presence. I'm just going to copy that onto the high one as well. We're into Steph asking about mastering stuff. I'm going to get to that later. I don't have many more elements to put in, so yeah, I've actually just got some backing vocals to chuck in, so I'll deal with them, and then I'll have a talk about master stuff, which is, it's a thing. It's a whole thing. It's another extremely dark art. So actually, the last thing I've got left, I think, that I haven't chucked into this mix is just a whole bunch of grouped backing vocals. There are 6 tracks. It's 3 different parts that I've double tracked all of them. First thing I'm going to do with them, I'm just going to select them all and I'm going to group them together because it makes my life easier, and I'll call this Bvox. Okay. Nope, wrong group. Let's make sure I've named that one so I can... Great. My phone's making noises. Let's make sure it's fine. No, everything's fine. There are no problems with the world that we hadn't already dealt with. And all these. Now, the first thing that is almost certainly going to be a problem with these vocals is that they're not going to be that well in time with each other. Especially they're doing... So I might just do a quick little bit of editing on these. So this is my 6 tracks of vocals. I'm just going to close up all the bits. And you can see this first one. Pretty good. This one, some of the buzz are off. And it's not too hard just to kind of click and drag over one of these buzz. And just kind of drag it in. You can also if you do this, it puts little fades on the edits, which is quite useful. That's all right. I mean, I'm not going to get too into this, but yeah, basically, if you click and drag over a section of audio like this, I like to get it so that it's kind of at a point of 0 at the end. You can just if you then move it, it kind of separates it out from the rest. If you hold down Command, the default action, or the default way it works, is that wherever you move it, it's going to snap it to the nearest grid division, to the nearest 16th or 32nd or whatever the grid is set to. If you hold down Command or Control if you're on Windows, it will let you place it in a more granular way. That's a bit better. That one's not too bad. I could probably make this one a bit better. I just want some nice tight backing vocals, and as I've said before, the best way to do that would be for me to have sung them better, but you know what? We're gonna fix it. Hold down Command. I'm just gonna do a little bit more, just to try and make it sound like I'm a musician. Click and drag over this, because things being really nice and tight together can also, I know it's not necessarily mixing, but sometimes that can be the problem with the coherence of a mix, is that if there's two parts that are playing with out of time with each other, it's not going to sound great, So it's not just a. Okay, I'm gonna call that done, and I'm just gonna. Yeah, I think it is just the same part copied and pasted, so I'm just gonna select all of it. Yeah, and I'm just gonna then select the ones that I have fixed a little bit and duplicate them out however many times. Now I could go through and EQ all these individually, but I can't be bothered. Life's too short. Sometimes that would be a good thing. I think particularly if you have backing vocals that have been sung by different people, different voices can have really quite different tonal qualities, and you might have to go through and EQ them all a little bit in order to make them more coherent. But I'm just gonna put an EQ over the whole lot. I'm gonna high pass it. Maybe gonna give it a little sparkle and see how it sounds. Now if I put these in, with the main vocals, so I'm also just gonna put a little bit of compression on these. There's so many options, That's just going to bring up the buzz, baz a little bit, which might be nice. We'll see how it sounds in the mix. In terms of panning again, these vocals, these main vocals, I'm probably going to leave straight down the middle. These backing vocals, I think I'm going to pan out. Usually with backing vocals, I tend to, as we were saying earlier on, I tend to think the higher the kind of frequency, the more, the further out I'd like to pan it. So I think, so I've got 2 low ones, 2 middle ones, 2 high ones, and I might actually put a bit more EQ on these high ones, because I tend to find when I'm singing falsetto it gets a little bit nasal. See that? And I'm quite happy for them to be quite sparkly. And I'm just copying and pasting that, but I've gone somewhere crazy. Okay. And you could, there's a few different ways to approach this. Sometimes what I like to do if I've got doubles is pan one out far, and then pan the next one down, not quite as far out, and then the next one down a little bit out. Could do it the other way, where maybe I put the high part all the way over one side and the next one down. It does start to come down to a bit of like, what's your story? What's the story you want to tell? Do you want the parts to have more sort of individual coherence, therefore putting the matching parts together, or do you want just to create a kind of a kind of thick sound feel there? Just messing with the individual level of these. Not sure if I love the buzz, but that's pretty good. Just solo these together. And then I'm just gonna. Now, because I've been listening to this track for ages, I think the drums might be a bit loud. And I feel like I'm missing I feel like I'm losing the hi-hats and the kick and snare a bit much, so. So yeah, there I've kind of worked from the bottom to the top. I generally work from I tend to do drums, then bass, then mid-range things, then kind of higher up. I tend to work sort of up the way in frequencies. There are certainly people who would disagree with that approach, or that would have other approaches. Some people quite like to actually start with the main vocal and bring in the other elements around that. I think that's also a totally quite a good approach. Sometimes going, well, the main vocal's the most important thing, so we'll start there. I think also the fact that I'm a live sound engineer, we always seem to start with give me some kick drum, please. So yeah. And then, I probably should have been doing this as I go along, but, just kind of listening to the track through and working out, hearing things as they come in and going, okay, is that sitting in the right place? At this point you also might start to be wanting to do some mix automation, maybe for instance I would want to, these Erebus synths are in at the beginning and then they're in later on when maybe I decide that I want these I would decide that I would want these to be in, to be higher in the mix when everything's in. That's definitely an option you could take. So if I press A to bring automation in, and there is an automation lane for volume. If I wanted them just to be in over this section, what I would probably do is I'm going to click a little bit before the section starts and click at the start of the section, then I'm going to click a little bit after the end of the section, and click at the end of the section. And if you move the mouse just under the line, and then click and move, then it actually moves the line and puts some nice little slopes there, which is quite useful. And then I can have the volume kind of go up over that section. I'm not sure if that's something I actually want, but that works quite nicely for me. So Steph was asking about master effects. So yeah, master effects are what you would put over the entire mix. You have an actual master track, so that you can put in effects that are going to affect absolutely everything, the entire mix. Now this is a whole thing. At the most basic level, what I would generally put in at the end is just a limiter, right? And this is mostly just about bringing your track up to kind of a maximum level. Now, I mean, mastering is a sort of dark art form all of itself. So this is like the most basic thing that you might do just to kind of finalize your track. So this is a limiter. A limiter is essentially a specialized type of compressor. What it's going to do is just going to have a top level, which in fact they refer to as the ceiling. These days I would probably set the ceiling to -1 dB, but anyway, oh no, you can type into that, can't you? Yeah, -1. And this one actually just has a gain control, so it's just going to push up the level of your track, and as it starts to reach the ceiling, you'll see that it's going to start pushing down. Now you can start pushing this so that it's actually limiting it quite hard. You're going to start to lose what's called dynamic range in your track, which is essentially the range between the quiet parts and loud parts. And this is like a really, really basic sort of idea of mastering. Just in the old days, mastering was, quite often records were cut straight. Things were they were cut straight onto record. They were they were recording it straight onto wax. And they had to make sure that it was a live performance cut straight onto a record, so they had to make sure that it was going to cut a nice strong signal, which is why they would use things like limiters to do that. And it's quite a mastering in itself is quite a large topic to deal with, but especially because the purposes of mastering have changed as formats have changed. They have started to, it was mastering for vinyl and mastering for tape, and then it became mastering for CD. When people were mastering music for vinyl, there were certain things that you couldn't do. You couldn't limit things too hard because the vinyl as a format couldn't handle it. When CD came along, because it was a digital format, things were able to be, they would really push things, they would limit them very hard because people wanted the loudest possible CD. And that became the sort of standard for quite a long time, is that people would really, what they refer to as the loudness wars was a real thing, and people would master CDs to just be the louder than the other one. All that's changing again, and it's changing in the other direction because of streaming. And it's a bit too much of a topic to really get into, but streaming services are quite clever in that they basically detect that there is a standard for loudness. It's LUFS, loudness units full scale, which once again I can't get too into, but it's actually starting to change things back to how they used to be, and less about making things as loud as possible, because the streaming services basically will analyze all the tracks that are uploaded to it, uh, give them a value of how of their loudness units, how sort of the overall perceived loudness of the track is, and if it's really loud, they turn it down. So it's, yeah, I'm waffling, but it is quite kind of tough thing for me to talk about overall. For me, the most basic thing I would do is this is going to be quite loud now. I'm just going to turn the master down. Obviously, if you were exporting things normally, I would leave the master setting at 0. So you can start pushing this up. Obviously, hopefully you can hear there, like I've absolutely cranked that limiter up. Definitely if you are sending things away to people to be mastered, don't put lots of stuff, but ideally don't put anything on your master track. Just leave your mix as it is, because that's what a mastering engineer is going to do. They're going to do this stuff. I tend to the other thing about mastering is that mastering can be a case of doing quite a lot to a track, and sometimes but it all depends on what the mix is like. In an ideal world, you can make a mix that where you've already done a lot of work, and a lot of people these days, especially when they're doing things with computers, they'll have done an awful lot of compression and EQing and things. So you don't want to do too much in mastering, especially if it's your track that you're sort of doing this stuff to. You don't necessarily need to do it on the mastering. You could just go and fix it in your own mix. Mastering is an enormous topic, and it scares me, even though I do it. It's quite a tough one. I don't actually use Live's built-in effects usually for mastering, but the most basic thing I would do is just use this limiter at the end. If you are at the point where you might find that you have all your tracks are turned up quite high, and actually you're hitting the red here, so instead of turning this gain up, you might actually be turning it down the way. But I would tend to just turn this limiter up so that it's maybe just starting to kick in a little bit at the loudest parts of the song. Honestly, for kind of finishing off a track, I think that's fine. There are other tools that Live has. It has what's called multiband dynamics. This multiband compression. Once again, this is this is like a rabbit hole thing here. Multiband compression is essentially it can split things into 3 different frequency ranges, so that you can you could apply sort of different compression or limiting to sort of higher frequencies, middle frequencies, and lower frequencies differently. This is something that people use in mastering quite often. Sometimes in order to kind of fix problems, or because they want to treat the bass parts of a track differently from how they would want to compress the higher up parts of a track. Multiband dynamics can be very useful, while at the same time, often, if this is your track and you're putting this over here in order to try and kind of control the low end differently from the higher elements of the track, maybe you could just control the low end where it's coming from. Maybe you could go, if you're trying to do it to change some relationship between the kick and the bass or something like that, you're much better not doing it on the master track and just going and fixing it at the source. yeah, if you are sending stuff to someone to master, I would not put any limiter on it, and I would also, I would leave it so that it's got some what they call some headroom. It should not be peaking. You should not be hitting red lights here. Is it possible for me to put this ceiling up? I'm just trying to. I'm just trying to demonstrate red lights. There you go. We found them. That's it. I'm sorry for your ears. But yeah, another useful plugin. Boring as hell, but actually extremely useful, is utility. Utility is really useful for a lot of things. Firstly, it's extremely useful if you're happy with the mix of your track, but it's hitting the red, but you're happy with the overall balance and you need to send it to someone. Utility is great because it literally just has a gain control. So you can just turn things down. It's transparent, it's not going to affect your track at all. Very useful. Another thing that actually utility is really useful for is sometimes if you do a lot of volume automation, and depending on the kind of music that you're making, you might be doing an awful lot of volume automation. But I mean, if if we look at this Erebus track, right, I've done some volume automation, but if I then decide that I want to, that just that I'm happy with the automation and in terms of the relations between the different parts of the track, but that I just want to turn that whole thing up. You can actually do it by selecting all the automation and actually dragging it up a bit, but it's a bit fiddly. But you could just stick a utility plugin on it and go, okay, well, we'll just bump it all up a bit. And in fact, the quite often what people like to do is do it the other way around. So instead of, if you want to automate the volume of a track and you're doing a lot of it, instead of automating the actual track volume here, let's just delete all that. You could automate the gain control on a utility plugin, so that you can do whatever you want there. Do some that'll be quite crazy. But you can do your kind of interesting and creative automation on this plugin here, and that's just going to act a bit like an extra fader. But then you've still left your main volume fader for the track alone in order to kind of just adjust the overall level. Utility can be really useful for that. Another thing I haven't talked about at all, which is worth mentioning, I feel like I've slightly skirted the question of mastering because it's a whole crazy thing, but I'm sort of the opinion that if you're doing stuff on your own, I think literally putting a limiter at the end and getting it up so it's just tickling it is a great start. And things like putting more EQ over the master and things, I don't think is that useful. Yeah, I don't think it's enormously useful because you have control of everything in the mix. So why EQ the master track, which is going to affect everything, when you could just go and tweak something on the you could go and tweak it on the actual track. Yeah, I think that's much more useful. But yeah, if you just want to get everything up to a decent level, I would put the ceiling to -1 dB. I think that's a good place for it to be. I'm not going to get into dB. The scaling of volume in music software uses what's called dBFS. That's decibels. Decibels means it's a logarithmic scale, and FS is full scale, which is basically between nothing and the highest number that they can represent in terms of volume. But yeah, I don't know if this is a perfect mix. Certainly, what I would do if this was something that I was mixing is I would probably you know, I would save it. Possibly I would also export it. Another thing to mention, just in case people hadn't noticed, you can also automate stuff on the master track. So, for instance, if I decided I wanted to go a bit 50s, my bass teacher at college always taught me something which always stuck with me. He said fade out, cop out, write an ending to your track. But you know, sometimes fade outs are nice. So you can automate the master volume if you want. You know, so maybe I could. You know, maybe I do want to upset Al the bass teacher and put in a fade out, and you can do that. That's not a great fade out, but what is the device that makes it sound so nice? There's so many options, which one is for me? Yeah, you can always do fun tricks like put a reverb over the whole track that is doing absolutely nothing, but then fades in as the track fades out, so that things not only get quieter but get further away. Hey, it's just a little trick. What is the device that makes it sound so nice? There's so many options, which one is for me? Make the choices right. Anyway, yeah, I feel like I've done quite a lot of waffling today. Whether any of it was useful or not, oh yeah, major shout out to Al James. I wonder where he is now. Al James, the bass teacher at Julianesque Valley College. He was a fine man, very fine man. Yeah, I would definitely recommend. Yeah, take a break from mixing. That's definitely something I always recommend. I also and I've always wondered whether there's a technical reason for it, but I always recommend. I'm sure we've covered this anyway, but you know, render your track out. You know, so I'm just going to select. I find it easiest just to move the loop brace to thing. Always remember that you might, if you have a track with lots of kind of reverbs and stuff on it, that I like to leave a good amount of time at the end, you know, in case those things are gonna, you know, need time to decay. In this case, I've actually faded out by this point, but you know, file, export audio and video. I'm gonna leave it on the default settings. I could export that to somewhere, or you could export an MP3, put it on your phone, take it somewhere else in the house, listen to it in the car. Listen to it on headphones, listen to it on speakers, see how it works in different places. And, you know, you might find that after doing stuff for a day that, you know, for a couple of hours, spending all this time mixing it, that it's, you know, you might have made a mess of it. It's fine. Sometimes you made a mess of it. Sometimes you spend ages putting plugin after plugin on everything and banging your head up against a wall. And sometimes you go the next day, switch it all off, put all the faders down to nothing, start pushing them up and find that you were trying to fix problems that weren't there. Sometimes you've just done the recording okay and you can just do nips and tucks. And I feel like with, you know, stuff like EQing, especially when you're using things like the kind of a lot of the built-in kind of live instruments, a lot of them, they sound really good. Like they do, they've been well constructed. They, you know, if they're made out of samples, the samples have been well recorded. They've made them so that they can be, you know, fairly ready to use. So you always think in terms of, you know, trying not to intervene too much on stuff unless it's a sort of sound design decision. There are some things, something I sometimes quite like to do that I didn't do in this. I am a big fan of the saturator. I didn't necessarily use it for this, but you know, things like this acoustic guitar. sometimes a bit of saturation can be what something needs to kind of give it a bit of edge. Compress stuff too much. It's fine. It's all right. Don't worry about it. You're gonna overcompress stuff. Compression is a very useful tool, but you can also compress the life out of your track. Be careful with compression. Be careful with equalizers. It's very tempting when you first start doing things to go into your bass and go, I'm gonna crank the bass up. You probably don't need to. It's a real. Sorry, this is going to be my last 5-minute waffle, really. It's so common on internet forums and places where people talk about music production. You'll have so many posts from people. I think particularly people who are trying to make sort of hip hop or EDM or kind of music, club music that's got a lot of bass in it, and people will be going, oh well, my tracks don't sound like they do in the club, and they're not, and you're like, well, and quite often people are like, oh, I'm gonna turn all the bass up. Nightclubs have big speakers. They have enormous big subs. If you're trying to make music that's that's bassy, if you listen to the club music in your on the speakers you have at home, they're probably not going to sound so bassy. So maybe use one of those tracks as a reference track and go, okay, how do I shape this, to make it sound like that? But yeah, a lot of people are like, it doesn't sound like it does in the club. That's because the club's got really big speakers. Listen, find some reference music and see what it sounds like on your speakers or on your headphones. Get to know your speakers. Get to know, whatever you're using. You might be using hi-fi speakers, you might be using computer speakers, you might be using headphones. Listen to other music. Get to know how other music sounds, music that you like, music that you think sounds good. Get to know that on the speakers that you're also using to mix, or the headphones that you're using to mix. And the more that you can get to understand how that music sounds, the more that you can make your music sound how it wants to sound, and the more that hopefully your mixes will translate well. That's they will translate to other systems well. And mix your music down, take it, go and listen to it in the house. Listen to it from even if you're still in the same speakers. Go and lie in your bed. Go and sit in a different corner. Go and put yourself in a different place. Switch the screen off. Listen to it there, and take a little time to live with it. Leave it for a couple of days. Come back to it. Have a friend listen to it. It's all these things are really useful. And it's very easy, I think, sometimes to do things that are a little bit too extreme when you do a first pass on a mix. Sometimes you can, compress the life out of it. There's all these things. Anyway, this has been a bit of a waffle today, but I think hopefully I demonstrated some things that might be useful about putting a mix together. I think especially if you're using a lot of the inbuilt Ableton instruments, I would concentrate much more on balance and a little bit of EQing, and thinking about the relationship between different elements in your mix, and placing them in the stereo field and EQing them in order to give each element its own space. I think that is the most important element of mixing. And I think that's the best thing to concentrate on before you start going too much into big amounts of compression. Learning to use EQ well. Also, Live's manual is really good. Read the flipping manual. It's really well written. It tells you everything. It has references on every effect because there are tons of them I've barely mentioned. Read the manual. It's great. Yeah. Anyway, I think I'm going to stop waffling now. It's 1 o'clock. I feel I've waffled quite hard, but I hope that I've made this track sound better than it did at the start of the day. I'm much happier with the vocals. Hopefully, and that's the bit I was always going to be sad about because everybody gets a bit funny about hearing their own voice. But even my silly lyrics, I was perfectly happy to hear them once they've been mixed a little bit. Um, yeah, keep in touch. Stay safe. Uh, Wash your hands. Don't go and visit your family in Durham. And yeah, if anyone has any further questions, feel free to use the Facebook group. And we can. I'm always happy to help out. Uh, this has been lovely. Not sure what I'm gonna do with my Mondays anymore, but I'm sure I'll work it out. Uh, yeah, let's. I'm gonna sign off now because I just feel like I'm killing time now. Um, yeah, this has been great. Thank you all, and I hope to. I really hope that some people might post up some music they've been making. I think that would be great. I have received some music from Alex, which was great, and it was really nice to hear him doing something that he didn't normally do. And ooh, excuse me. Yeah, I'd love to hear some outcomes from this. I think that'd be great. Yeah, right. Thank you. I am gonna sign off and go and have some lunch. Might be beans on toast today. I do love it. Right. Thank you, folks. Till the next time, or till we see each other in real life. It'll happen soon. Maybe not as soon as we want, but it'll happen. Cheerio. Donate to things. Save the venues. Save the venues. Glad Cafe. Also, the Glad have a. Oh yeah, the Glad have a. They have a survey for people to fill out. I'm sure Joe can post about it. It's related to them applying for more funding to do more stuff online and digitally as a result of all this COVID nonsense, and also as an ongoing thing. If anyone who hasn't done, I'm sure Joe can provide you with the link, but it's a really short survey just about whether you've used any of their online services as the lockdown's been going on. But it'd be really good if they could get more funding because they're great people. Okay, I'm done. It's been great. Thank you. Bye.